Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Adventures in Theater History, where we bring you the best stories about the deep and fascinating history of theater in the city of Philadelphia. I'm your host, Peter Schmitz. Our original theme music is by Christopher Mark Colucci. And we have something to celebrate. This is, in fact, our 100th episode. Thank you. Although I admit I'm cheating on that number a little bit because in that total there are about 10 encore episodes that we've done over the past 4 years, or remixed versions of older episodes. But still, as we now enter into our 5th year of doing our work here, it's good to stop and look back at all we've managed to accomplish together. So for our episode 100, as we continue our season 4, I'm thrilled to bring you this interview with one of the most dynamic and consequential artistic directors and producers of the modern era of Philadelphia theater history, Sarah Guronsek. We spoke in May of 2025 over Zoom, and here is our conversation. And proud to have with us today the executive producing director emeritus of the Philadelphia Theater Company, Sarah Guronsek. Sarah Guronsek, for over the past 35 years or more, has spearheaded the artistic and organizational growth of the Philadelphia Theater Company. She created and implemented PTC's mission to produce and develop new American plays and musicals, overseeing 30 main stage world premieres, including Terrence McNally's Tony Award-winning Masterclass, and other premieres included works by such noted theater artists as Bill Irwin, Anna Deavere Smith, Lucas Hnath, Ike Holter, Christopher Durang, Teresa Rebeck, Naomi Wallace, and J.T. Rogers. She has played a major role in the creation of the Suzanne Roberts Theater, from its conception and design and its capital fundraising to its final construction and opening in 2007. Since she became the artistic director in June of 1982, in addition to those playwrights already mentioned, she and the board made it a mission to the company to celebrate a broad and diverse range of new and contemporary writers. These included everyone from established playwrights like August Wilson and Lynn Nottage to lesser-known writers such as Tracy Scott Wilson, Kimberly and Charles Oyamo Gordon. And throughout her tenure, PTC was proud to be a leader in hiring female directors, designers, and dramaturgs for its main stage productions. She forged numerous creative collaborations with commercial producers and nonprofit theaters, including the Kennedy Center, the Baltimore Center Stage, Long Wharf, and the Paper Mill Playhouse. My gosh, what a long bio. I'm so excited to finally hear you after reading all that. Sarah, welcome to Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia.
Very glad to be here.
Well,
that's a long bio. I can't believe it.
It is. I don't know how you...
I had a lot of time to get it done. So.
Right. So there's a chapter in my book in which I describe the opening night of the Suzanne Roberts Theater on South Broad Street, as your company at long last moved from its 25-year-long home at Plays and Players. What do you remember about that particular evening, about that opening of the Suzanne Roberts Theater?
Well, I have to say that it's sort of a big blur in retrospect, but if I think about it, certain moments will come through the fog, and I'll remember. The stakes were so high. There were so many people there. There was so much to juggle, and we weren't quite finished building the theater exactly. We were still bolting in a few chairs, some Lecos and other things needed to be installed in the lighting grid. You know, we got there by the skin of our teeth. We were on a very strict schedule on getting that place built. And so to finally get there on opening night, it took our breath away. Also, the program was, a lot of wonderful people talking about theater and this space and blessing it, which was just a stunning thing. I remember Terrence McNally kissing the stage.
Oh.
And everybody, he got down. And this is after having some serious medical treatments for
him.
And he got down on that stage and kissed the stage. And that was a real weeper. I'll never forget that. I think that pops more than anything. But we had changed the programming. We were going to open with a play that Terrence wrote called Unusual Acts of Devotion. He wrote it for Kathy Bates, and that's what was going to open the theater. And then about 2 months before we were about to go into rehearsal, Kathy Bates had to pull out due to some serious health issues. from which apparently she has recovered and she's thriving. But at the time, they were very dangerous. And so we made the decision jointly, Terrence and we and everyone, that we would not go through with that production. We would wait until she was well or things changed and he still needed to do some more work on it. So I was sort of left with what in the world are we going to do to open this new theater? The stakes were enormous. The theater was fabulous. What are we going to put in there? And I found a project that was still coming together. It was an evening of Sondheim, sort of a blues and black music idiom. There was jazz and blues and gospel and all kinds of things. And it was held loosely together with the script that was still emerging. It was put together by Billy Porter.
Right.
So Billy directed that, and we knew that Sondheim was going to pop in. I forget if he came opening night or a preview. I don't remember. But it was all brand new. It's not what we thought we were going to open with, and it was still finding its footing, and we're still tweaking the sound and all that. So from my point of view, I was like, will this show hold? Is this going to be ready on opening night? So I was filled with that, to say nothing with the fact that there's workers still screwing things into the wall.
Right.
And there's all these incredibly important people there, and it's very glitzy and all that. That's what was opening night for me.
Wow. And of course, it went wonderfully. As
Oh, it went well.
I always think of that line from Shakespeare in Love. It's a mystery, but
right. It's a mystery.
Right.
So we were all, with enough champagne and all that, and love for the building and seeing this thing finally happen, and it was fine.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, now that we've touched there sort of as a starting point, I'd like to ask you to go back with me to the beginning of your career in Philly theater. Now, as I can tell just from listening to you, and I'm really hearing it clearly today, I don't know why, you're Philly born and bred. I can hear it in your
really?
way you
Yes.
talk. Did you do theater in school as a young person?
No, absolutely not.
Wow.
Well, when I went to girls' high and it was all girls. And so
sure.
the limits of the theater club, if there was one, the choices were made by the teachers and very narrow, and it didn't capture my interest. I just thought theater was something that you go see. Your parents took you to see theater, and I went to tryouts and all that stuff in Philadelphia that you go to when you're growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what theater was.
What do you remember seeing in particular during the tryout town era?
Well, I remember two things. One, when I was a kid, I was taken to see something called A Family Affair. And it starred Shelley Berman from Chicago, whose grounding was in improv and stuff. His whole thing was comedy as if he were on the phone. That's what I remember about Shelley Berman. Anyway, all I know is it was very adult. People were walking around saying, damn it, and spilling martinis. And I thought, wow, this is really something. And my mother made it clear this was very adult stuff. I shouldn't talk that way, but, she thought I could see this kind of work at this point. So that was one thing. And another thing I saw, but I'd already joined the world of theater. I saw Holly Golightly.
Oh, yes. With Richard Chamberlain and Mary Tyler Moore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, I learned what turkey was. That was
terrible.
Note one, turntable move one, that it was not good.
Yeah, we've written and talked about that on the podcast. And
really?
later they brought in Edward Albee, of all people, to try and fix it.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Well, you grew up in Northwest Philadelphia, and your dad ran an Army-Navy store. Is that right?
Yes, he did. In town, yeah.
But that gave you kind of a nice childhood. You grew up in sort of pleasant surroundings there.
Yeah, very pleasant. And, art was important. So I was dragged to the children's series at the Academy of Music. It seemed like all we heard was Peter and the Wolf. And over again. They must have done something else. So I did that. I went to ballet class. I went to sculpting class at the Art Museum. And I went to tryouts and all that.
So you were exposed to the arts, but you were a Spanish major at Temple University. Is that right?
Right. I was a Spanish major at Temple, yes.
And then you went on to graduate school, also in Spanish, to the University of
I got into graduate school at Penn, but I quickly dropped out because I was still clueless as to what I wanted to do with my life.
Well, I remember that feeling, yeah.
Spanish was, I was good at it. I was kind of a scholar, and I got the Spanish Honor Society's prize when I left, and I thought that would be it, and I would work at the UN or something. I had no idea what I would do with it.
But then you somehow you walked into audition for something called the Actors Lab Theater Company,
Yeah,
which was then working out of St. Mary's Church along Locust Walk there on the Penn campus.
right.
And so tell us something about the Actors Lab and its leader, John Descano.
God, I haven't heard that name in so long. Um, all I can recall about John is I believe he was part of the Hedgerow group. I think
Okay.
that he studied with Jap Dieter and all of that, and I think that's where he came from.
Okay. Yeah, because I was looking through an interview that you did back, 30 years ago with the newspaper, and this story came up, and I said, Actors Lab. Do I know the Actors Lab? And it turned out it was nowhere in my notes, and I had to do some digging into the archives to find it. It was one of the several theater companies that were down in the early 70s, usually run by one teacher.
Yes,
And they
exactly.
would be in a community center or a church. They'd hold classes and maybe they'd put on a few shows. There were about 8 to 12 theaters like that in Philly at the time.
Well, this was one of them. It was very serious. I mean, we were trained as an ensemble in Grotowski. As a matter of fact, Grotowski came to Philadelphia.
That's right, during that period.
He set up in a church in South Philadelphia,
Right.
and we were invited to come and train with him for a couple of days and all of
Did you? You work with Grotowski?
that.
Yeah.
I mean, we were, I don't remember what we did, but it was a lot of movement and
Right. Well, they did Apocalypsis cum figuras there in that church, as
church. Is that what
famously.
it was? Right.
Yeah. For an invited audience of like 100 people at a time. It was very
Cool.
special.
I don't remember. I'm sure I saw it because I was hanging around there.
Right.
I don't recall it. It was all about, epic themes and very deep psychology and movement that was rooted in something much bigger than just normal humans walk around with. It was reaching for some sort of glorious movement that somehow became godly. And I never understood it.
No, I must admit, I had some early Grotowski training myself and it was also lost on me. So,
Lost. I mean, I had no clue, but so I'm afraid the day of training we had with Grotowski was I don't know if it found its way into my
right. But what was John Descano teaching you in his classes?
well, I don't recall, to be honest. We were doing a
Yeah.
lot of physical work. We were doing the Alexander technique, which
Okay.
is your voice.
Right.
I do remember the productions a little more. I mean, like so many
Well,
people.
I found this photo of you from
Yeah,
the Inquirer. You were playing Eve in Arthur Miller's The Creation of the World and Other Business.
a role that was started by Zoe Caldwell, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, we did that. He brought in a guest director, Mark Conti,
Right.
was running the Pocket Playhouse that I later
Right.
joined.
Right. And we're going to talk to Joe Canuso next, and he's going to
Oh,
tell us about the
Joe,
Pocket Playhouse. Yeah.
of course. I came in towards the end of all that,
Right.
but yeah. So, and I think John was really into, as so many people were, more of a Eurocentric kind of theater.
Hmm.
Even Brits like Pinter, and he was into Sartre. And I'm trying to think of, there was a particular German playwright that he was into,
Peter Handke.
exactly.
Yes.
I remember doing a production of Offending the Audience.
Okay.
Yeah, we stood there with weapons and literally assaulted them.
Oh, the Germans love to threaten the audience.
Right,
Yes.
grounding was, I don't remember, but
Accuse them. Yes.
it was interesting.
Well, but what did this sudden change from sort of an unformed youth when you weren't quite sure what was there about the theater that grabbed you? Why does it feel like, oh, this is what I'm doing now?
Yeah, well, I think there was something that was seated in me in a latent way. Sometime when I was in college, someone took me on a date to see what was, I later found out, the Pocket Playhouse. And
Mhm.
they were in I think, an old firehouse somewhere like around 24th and Lombard or whatever. And he took me, we went to see this. It was three one acts of three New York writers from the off-Broadway scene. One was Terrence McNally, one was, I don't remember the other two, but they were the writers of their day.
Sure.
And the company, of course, was all local and trained under Mark Conti. And the work was, right now, I felt these were my contemporaries speaking to me. It wasn't Shelley Berman and it wasn't Richard Burton in Camelot, it wasn't, it was like my generation, and it sort of went right through me. I thought, who are these people that are doing these things? I mean, I was just lit up from that whole experience. It was intellectually and emotionally just a complete revelation for me. So did I do anything about theater? No. So for some reason, I put it right back in the box and did
Hmm.
nothing about it because in some way I always thought theater was for the other. I didn't think I had, well, talent for one, or the guts to do it. So I guess when I auditioned for the Actors Lab Theater Company, because anyone could walk in the door and have an audition, I think something in me woke up that was seeded from that earlier productions of several years ago.
And then you found yourself cast and you found yourself doing shows. And what was
Yeah.
that like to suddenly be on stage, to be
Well,
regarded, to
the
be
thing
important?
is, when you don't know what you're doing,
Yeah,
you're not scared
right.
because you don't know what good is. I mean, you don't know what you should be doing. You're just releasing and having fun and maybe getting good reviews and thinking you're an actor. And no one is saying, "My God, you're terrible." Do you know it's going to take you 10 years till you earn 1 minute of stage time? Okay, so I was in my 20s and having a grand time, thrilled I wasn't in graduate school, and it was a way to explore my identity and who I was. And
Hmm.
so I had a ball. But as the more I did it, the less and less fun I was having because I was realizing, my God, you have no idea what you're doing. I started to see good work and realize I can't do that for God's sakes. I mean, I love it and I love theater and I want to do and be theater, but I didn't have the emotional wherewithal to do that excavation that one needs to do as an actor and devote every part of your being emotionally, psychically to that. And I realized, oh my God, that's not for me.
And yet you wanted to stay involved in the
What is for
theater.
me?
So, well, yeah, what was for you? Where did you turn next?
Well, the old cliche, what I really wanted to do was direct. So I realized that there was a part of me I was not allowing to engage when I was acting. Somehow my intellect, the executive part of my brain that wanted to create things and call the shots on what was happening, I was simply following a director's bidding and trying to accommodate him because there were no hers as best I could. But this whole other part of me that had definite ideas, that's the part that started to grow in me, saying, I think I really want to mold the whole piece.
I'm so glad to reach 1980 because the last few episodes I've seemed to be stuck in the 1970s, and as
Right,
fascinating as I find that decade, and it was important in my own life, I'm trying to bring the podcast forward in time, and that's
right,
why
right,
you're here today.
right.
So,
All right.
by
Well,
1980, you had joined the company of the Philadelphia Company, as it was
yeah,
called then,
right.
and Bob Headley was just leaving. He was about to go to Iowa. They found a new artistic director. They were still working out of a theater on 312 South Broad Street.
Yes,
And you were doing Lanford Wilson's The Rhymers of Eldritch,
right,
which is a large ensemble cast set in a small town in
right.
Missouri. But you were doing that show, and that's where you met somebody named James DeFonso, who was
Oh,
also in the cast.
right. He was in the cast. So
Yeah,
the short story is we played boyfriend and girlfriend in Rhymers.
right.
And we became a couple and we're still a couple. So
So
fast
that
forward
worked out.
right into the future. So that worked out, especially to the degree that he was not only tolerant, but supportive of my giving so much of my life to the Philadelphia Theater Company.
Right. Well, he didn't stay an actor either. He went into the technical side of things. Is that right?
He actually just became an audiovisual engineer. I mean, he
Yeah.
had to make a living for God's sake. So
Hmm.
that's what he's been doing.
Right.
And acting where he couldn't. His real passion turned into film anyway. So he loves to do his own film projects.
So by 1982, the Philadelphia company had gone equity. It had signed an actors equity contract, which a
Yes,
number of theaters were doing. The Wilma Theater had just signed an equity contract. The People's Light and Theater had signed an equity contract.
yes.
And you were by that point the associate artistic director. How did you make that leap?
Well, when I came to the company, the person that Bob sort of handed the scepter to was a guy named Kirk Fisher. And I said to him, listen, I had been directing by then in various little places like The Painted Bride. I was self producing. And I said, look, I just want to be part of this company. I know you're transitioning and you're just getting it together. If I could just assist you in any way, I'll do. I will clean the bathrooms, I'll do press for you. Just let me direct. Okay, just let me direct something, one thing a year. Okay. And so during his tenure, I got to direct something,
Which was
okay,
it?
Getting Out by Marcia Norman.
Okay, yes, very
And I
popular at
was
the time.
besotted with that. It just
Sure.
seemed to express everything that I was at the time.
Right.
And
And
so,
it's about a female convict getting out of prison, right?
yes. And
Yes.
so the characters in that particular play, are the woman fully grown out of prison, and the wild child that she was
Right.
continues to haunt her. And so you have two versions, two pieces of that. So I began directing for this transitional company, the Philadelphia Company.
Hmm.
And so there was a new person that they hired named Paul Hastings, and same deal. He inherited me.
Right.
And I said, and the deal is, Paul, I'll do anything, okay, but you have to let me direct. And so I directed something called Nuts, which was
A similar sort of piece about a woman, but who just experienced a
insanity
trauma.
trial. A woman who was being
Right.
accused of murdering, a
Right.
prostitute is being accused of murdering her John.
Yeah.
I loved prostitutes and bad girls and things like that at the time. I thought that was gritty, so I love that. But it was a courtroom drama, and
Right.
we all love courtroom dramas. By the end of that season, that play was such a massive hit. We were at that time at Plays and Players. It was our first
Yeah.
at Plays and Players.
How had the Philadelphia Company moved on to Plays and Players, which at that point, up to that point, had been sort of an amateur, little theater company for decades?
Well, why that venue? Well, we
Yeah.
wanted to increase our capacity. I mean, here we were in 312 South Broad Street, which was
Hmm.
50 seats. I mean, you can't possibly grow. I was really hungry to grow the company with a subscription base and full seasons and all of that. Insanely ambitious, and you couldn't do that. And it's a 50-seat theater, and so Plays and Players was really underused, and so we went in there and signed a lease and signed a letter of agreement with Actors Equity.
Right.
That's what Actors Equity was offering at the time, a letter of agreement, which
Right.
means you agree that you pay your actors a certain minimum, but you agree to, as your fortunes increase, so will the salary levels. And we were happy to sign it. And so I think our first year in Plays and Players, we had tripled our capacity, more than that, no, tripled our capacity. We signed a letter of agreement, and we had a subscription base going. And I think we had something like 750 subscribers with our first effort. So we were hanging out our sign saying, okay, we're here, we're in business, we are a serious theater company with a new mission.
So I have this list of everything. And this is from what used to be the Philadelphia Theater Company's website. They used to have just a list of all their different
Yes,
productions over the
right, right,
years.
right, right.
And throughout the 1980s, and I'm looking at it's in reverse chronological order. So I'm going to start at the bottom of the page, and I
Yeah,
see 5th of July by Lanford Wilson, True
yeah.
West by Sam Shepard, Getting Out by Marcia Norman. There it is.
Okay.
And then as we get into 84, 85, Fool for Love by Sam Shepard, Terra Nova by Ted Talley, Extremities by William Master Simone, and another extreme play for a woman to go through a lot of trauma in the middle of. Painting Churches by Tina Howe. In 86, I see Citizen Tom Paine by Howard Fast, which starred Richard Thomas. As Is by William Hoffman. Gets into Orphans by Lyle Kessler, the Philly playwright in 1987, which is actually set in Philadelphia, who was a fellow Temple guy.
Yeah.
And then Glenn Ross, towards the end of the 80s, you were staging plays that were very common to the sort of off-Broadway or regional theater repertoire of that era.
Well, my vision for the theater was, again, it was about my generation of writers that was presenting themselves, in a very powerful way at that time. The fact that, my God, that you've written about, the theater was becoming decentralized. So New York was not the center of the universe anymore.
Right.
It was playing itself out regionally, and there was a regional voice that was starting to emerge. So
right, Philly had left the tryout town era, and it was now starting to organize its own companies.
Who was doing David Mamet? Who was doing Marcia Norman? It was a big. Who's doing Lanford Wilson?
Right.
Drama Guild was, Doug Seal, and he was doing, he was Canadian and doing
Right.
British and mostly British stuff. And
Right.
Where's our voice that's coming?
Yeah. So what's also coming up on the Wilma project had become the Wilma Theater, and they're tending to do more European style and absurdist dramas, epic things. The Walnut, Bernard's just starting the Walnut. They're doing They have a huge space, so they have to do more crowd pleasing pieces. The Drama Guild is trying to fill the Zellerbach for the most part. So you had found this niche, plays that would fit into like a 300-seat theater and that would get a regular subscription audience, but you were continuing Bob Headley's original message, which was helping to develop and work with young American playwrights. That's what he had always done. Yeah.
Exactly. What we began to do, well, that era was me directing at least one show a season, although I started to undergo a sea change about how I felt about directing.
Right.
But that represent a period of time when I was doing some of the directing. And also, I very much wanted to get back into developing new work and having the guts to put it on the main stage. But I needed to have the resources, to feel that I had the resources to support a writer. I felt I needed a dramaturg. I needed people who knew how to work with writers. I needed to educate the audience about what to expect when you see a brand new play. But we did wet our beaks with that. We did a new play called Hospitality by a guy named Alan Havis, who is, I think, on the West Coast now. And that was about corruption in the Immigration and Naturalization Service.
Oh, wow. It could still be timely.
Very interesting. Yeah, and so that was kind of our first new play.
I see.
We did okay. We supported Alan Havis well. We had a great cast with Larry Pine
Oh, wow.
and others, and so our first debut play was pretty good. And then later on, I guess in 1986, we did Citizen Tom Paine by Howard Fast, who he wrote a play about Thomas, the famous book,
Right.
Citizen Tom Paine, and he theatricalized it, and it starred a Richard Thomas and a cast of 20. And
Yeah.
I heard that it was being developed up at Williamstown. I didn't even know about it, but I read that it just closed and it caused a lot of excitement and all that. And they were looking for a new home. And I got on the phone and I found Howard Fast and I said, we have to do that. We're gonna be your next home. We're gonna do it in Philadelphia. It's just in time for, it wasn't the bicentennial, it was like what came after.
Well, it was the bicentennial of the Constitution.
That was it. That was
Yeah.
exactly it, of the Constitution, and we are going to do that. So come on down and take a look at Plays and Players Theater. You're going to love it. It's like charming as hell and intimate at the same time, and you'll love it. And somehow we worked this deal. We were that second home, and then Richard Thomas, who came with the project, said, "Listen, Roger Stevenson at the Kennedy Center, he's interested in it too. So why don't we go talk to him?" And we can do this thing at the Kennedy Center, and maybe they could give you some money and help with the production and all that stuff. So I went down and talked to Roger Stevens and with Richard Thomas
Mhm.
and our general manager at the time, Christina Sterner. And Roger Stevens said, "Yeah, sure, we definitely want to do this play. This is great. You'll do this play, and
Mhm.
then we'll take your production at the Kennedy Center, and then we'll do it here. And here's $25,000 just so you can afford to do it because you guys seem kind of small. So just to make sure that everyone makes it a living wage and it looks good, do that. And $25,000. Oh
Well,
my God.
yeah.
So, I mean, we still paid people what we would pay on a letter of agreement, but it allowed us to breathe a little bit. So if the lighting designer, who we became very close to, James Engel, said, "Look, I really got to have such and such effect
Mhm.
when Thomas Paine dies. I really need to have a certain effect, and that it would be costly and all that." We were able to say, "Sure,
Right.
here's a little slush fund for you." So we found that we were very agreeable partners. We were very happy to let Roger into the process, but I loved opening the doors to have all of these new people come in.
Yeah.
And we found that we loved working with them. And also we had, most of the cast, almost all of the cast were people we had worked with before. So it was a very family-like kind of enterprise.
Mhm.
And the production values were just lovely. They were quite beautiful, and Plays and Players looked fabulous. And we really shook it up. And it wasn't a perfect play, but it created tremendous excitement.
Wasn't
And
didn't Richard Thomas get sick just before opening or something, and you had to
yes,
delay the yeah.
he got the flu, and he
Yeah.
would like, do a scene and then come off the stage, and someone held a bucket for him while he
Oh,
threw up, and then he'd go back out.
wow.
He is what you call a trooper.
Yes, indeed.
So he was, yeah, it was interesting. And that also, I have to say, that also made all of us start thinking about we've got to get out of Plays and Players because the dressing rooms downstairs were in the basement.
Right.
And when it rained, sometimes it would flood out and it was
Yes.
very wet. The walls were wet and you couldn't handle a cast of like bigger than maybe 8 or something like that. So Richard Thomas, we had to set up a cot for him in the boiler room. And, for him to be nice and dry and it to be quiet. And note to self, you must leave this theater
Right.
and find a place where not just Richard Thomas, any artist can like sit in a nice, dry, quiet theater that doesn't flood out, when it
Right.
rains.
Well, by that time, the Plays and Players, which had been built in the second decade of the 20th century, was showing its age. It had been built with much enthusiasm by an amateur theater group and had been seen a lot of use over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing little workhorse. True.
Yeah, it still is
It
amazingly.
still is. And I
Yeah,
love the way things looked on that stage. The
right.
proportions of that venue are just
It's
perfect.
well designed. But then, towards the end of the decade of 1980s, came a very painful period. And I know it's not your favorite thing to talk about, but the Philadelphia Theater Company almost folded.
Yes.
In November of 1989, I know during dress rehearsals for a play you were doing called Tea, which was
Yeah.
set in Japan or Korea.
It was about Japanese women that married American soldiers and made a life
Right.
in America.
But it never opened because, according to this story I saw, the managing director of the theater, just like on dress rehearsal, came in and announced that the company was $260,000 in the hole, and the show was not going to go up at all. They had to close immediately. How had this huge? I mean, I've heard this story. We heard this from the Drama Guild. I've heard this from other theater companies. It's not unknown. It's not like you're the only person it's ever happened to. But
Right.
how had this sudden gap reached such a crisis point?
Well, we'd have to go back a few years. My partner, Christina Sterner, had left, and we hired somebody new who was a great guy. He had a strong grounding in financial services as opposed to fundraising and marketing. And at
Okay.
that time, I was the artistic director. I was into directing, but I began after Christina left to really start observing how the business was running, and I was starting to understand that certain things were not getting done that I thought needed to get done, and I could see it and feel it very clearly. I went out and I got a consultant that I believe William Penn paid for to come in and study our operations, and she also said, yeah, you need to make some changes here. However, by the time this happened, apparently a deficit had run up. And so the board at that time decided to close it right there. I was back in the office, so I was coming to the theater and I really.
And the office is over in the Bourse, right? So you're in the Bourse
Yes,
building,
yes,
right?
absolutely. I was coming to look at the tech rehearsal
Right.
and apparently some board member actually called the press to announce it before telling me.
Oh no.
So it was kind of bedlam. And then people were starting to come, actually maybe an invited dress rehearsal or something. I don't remember. People were starting to show up and we could not and let them in. So it was kind of bedlam and boom, the theater kind of closed. So I was in a state of complete shock. Just on one moment, we have a full season that we're supposed to do, and the next moment there is nothing. And decisions were made by others, and I was not included in the decision making. And some board members on the phone, and anyway, it was ridiculous,
Okay.
and really appalling. The whole situation was appalling. I was embarrassed, and the part of me that wasn't in a daze was embarrassed at such behavior on everyone's part. So I was in a daze for a few weeks. James and I adopted a beagle. And I was starting to think about, okay, what's next with James and I and the beagle, and what am I going to do? Should I become a freelance director? Should I try to produce somewhere? I mean, what do I do? Do I go back to acting? I can't act. I was really in a quandary. And then a wonderful board member named Ken Kaiserman, who fortunately died prematurely, but an extraordinary man and the light of our lives. He said, look, I've been talking to a few board members and this is ridiculous. We don't think this should happen. We have a board who's committed to seeing this thing through. Those of us that have stayed on, we clearly think you should be the leader. You have what it takes. You be the boss, reorganize the theater. We're behind you. As a matter of fact, someone has already offered up like $50,000 to the startup. And let's get this show on the road here. And so I just shook off the stupor and invited a few people from the staff that had been laid off to come back, not everybody, but just a few, to create my little team. And we
Mhm.
started building back up. And by the next fall of 1990, we had a three-play season and we took the debt and we pretty much got rid of it.
Wow.
It was amazing, actually.
Yeah, yeah, a real near-death experience, professionally
That
speaking.
experience, but we
Yeah.
grabbed it and we saved it, and it was the best thing that ever happened to the company. The new organization, the new structure was fantastic. Became long range planners. We became a better organized business, and the work got better. I stopped directing.
You stopped directing at that
I
point.
stopped directing. I said, that's it. You can call me the producing artistic director because what I
Right.
want to do is not direct. I want to produce. I want to move the organization ahead, not just the productions. I want to move the whole ball of wax. And I was just ready to do that.
And you'd been working, there was someone, a volunteer from the Philadelphia business community that sort of partnered with you for a while and sort of helped to lead
We
you
had a
along that.
few
Yeah,
people. I mean, believe me when I say this was not me. This was not me on my own. We all put our nose to the grindstone, all of us, the board and the staff and me. And we had a couple people from the Arts and Business Council to help us. Well, one of them was a guy named Joe Doretsky from Drinker, Biddle and Wreath. And he helped me put together, which was new for me, the budgets and cash flows and all that to help me get that part together and help us restructure the debt. And there was a guy named Bill Tennant who also helped financially, took care of our audits and all that. And our board president at the time, Don Rosenblit, and all of us got together and pitched in.
right. And the Henkel Corporation.
And the wonderful Henkel Corporation, a woman named Birgit Wolf, uh,
Uh-huh.
who's German and was married to Harold Wolf, who
Yeah.
was the CEO of Henkel. And Ken Kaiserman had brought her onto the board, and she loved us and she loved everything about us. We loved
And
her. And then we went out of business. And she said, this cannot be. We're going to
right.
fix it. We're going to fix it.
uh,
And so
Nothing like an efficient German woman
oh
to
my
come and
God,
fix
God
things for
bless
you.
her. She was
Yeah.
great. And she brought in a woman who became our board president at one point and was about the smartest person I've ever met in my life, named Monica Krug. Monica helped me with the business side, again, in terms of financial planning. And Birgit brought in a $50,000 grant from the Henkel Company.
Wow.
And then I began restoring our relationship with the funders because I
Right.
had to get them to trust us again.
And one of the major things you did to accomplish that was Mandy Patinkin showed up to do a fundraiser for you in
Not
April of 1990.
voluntarily, but yes, we did have a fundraiser
Yeah.
for the company's stability, and he
Yeah.
came and did a wonderful show with his, he wears a sweatshirt and he shoes, and he sits on the edge of the stage and just charms the birds out of the trees and has that voice. So that was great. We began doing things like that every year, fundraisers where there would be someone related to, theater
Right.
that would make sense. Though sometimes we brought in Michael. Michael, he does the whole Rodgers and Hammerstein songbook. Michael Feinstein.
But by 19, you were able to have a three-play season. You did Speed the Plow, The
Yes,
Cocktail Hour,
Stephen
and
Plow and
Kill Hill.
Cocktail Hour with Celeste Holm.
Celeste Holm, yes, I was just looking at that.
Yeah,
It
and
was
her
now at
husband
a point in
Wesley
her life when she was happy to do a play about drinking, even though she was not a drinker herself.
and it did incredibly well and put us on the road to getting our subscribers back.
So that brings us into the whole decade of the 1990s. You're doing, at this point, 4 shows a season, and you start by doing Lips Together, Teeth Apart in 1992. Had you been working with Terrence McNally before that point, or was this the first time when Terrence
Live
McNally?
Together. Okay, well, we had done something a few years before, Frankie and Johnny and the Claire de Lune,
Right.
that Sheldon Epps directed with a black cast. That was kind of fun. And then Lips Together, Teeth Apart was directed by Chris Ashley, who was fresh out of school at Yale. And it was a really great production. And Terrence heard about it and he sent his spies down to
Oh,
check it out. He didn't come down himself, but people he trusted. And they came back and they said to him, these people are good. They know how to treat your material. And it had, again, Larry Pine is in it and Alma
mhm.
Cuervo. And, this is pretty good. And the set was beautiful. So that put it in Terrence's mind that when he needed to reach out beyond MTC to develop one of his new plays, maybe he wanted to not do it in New York and
Mhm.
maybe disappear in Philadelphia so much.
Yeah. Did you find that you were able at this point to sort of sell Philadelphia? That before, I mean, Philadelphia was sort of off the end of the earth. I was in New York at the time, and I know the idea of coming to Philadelphia, you might as well just walk off the end of the earth and no one will ever see
That
you
is
again.
such a ridiculous New York thing. I mean, people
Yes.
start gasping for air the further
Right.
up they go, like they're away from the marketplace. But everybody that, not just us, any of us, I think that work with people from out of town would come to Philadelphia, stay in these adorable apartments, walk from green country space to green country space, walk down Walnut Street, shop, have fabulous food, look at the architecture. Everyone fell in love with Philadelphia. Everybody. We were the great undiscovered, under the radar city of charm and affordability. And we still are. We're not so under the radar anymore,
Yeah.
but we're that amazing city that like, oh my God, you're here. Artists would come to and just say, why didn't I know about you? I'm moving here, or invite me back, or I'll come anytime, that sort of thing.
So throughout the 1990s, you're producing shows by Romulus Linney and Donald Margulies, David Ives,
Yeah. Believe it or not.
and Arthur Miller. Broken Glass comes in
Oh, right,
1995, but he was still writing,
right.
right?
Yes.
And David Rabe, who had been in Philly for a long time, does A
Oh,
Question of Mercy in
that
1997.
was such a beautiful play. My God, that was gorgeous.
I don't know that play at all. Why was that beautiful?
So beautiful. One of my favorites, actually. It was sort of about euthanasia. That it was an AIDS
Oh
play,
yeah,
kind of.
we're still in the midst of the worst of the epidemic in the 90s.
And,
Yeah,
this wonderful couple and what they had to do to take this what man had to do to take his love out of pain, and
right.
a doctor who grappled with the ethics of should I help them do this or not. It was a stunningly beautiful play. Just
Hmm.
and I was glad to do David Rabe. Anything that connected us back to Bob Headley was
Right. Yeah. And Bob was back in Philadelphia by that point. He had come back to Temple at that point.
wonderful.
So he was back in town. Yeah. And there's more theater going on all around you. Did you feel that by the 1990s, now that the Arden and the Wilma and the
Oh my
Walnut are
God,
all
we were,
burgeoning?
yes. I thought Philadelphia was red hot. There was so much of us. We were all doing great work, all of us.
Hmm.
We were ambitious, competitive, and the more competitive we got, the more ambitious we got. It was
Right.
it was very healthy. I mean, it was like, kind
Yeah.
of
And there were awards now. There were Barrymore Awards and there
very
were winners and losers. And
yeah,
yeah.
we were a serious theater town in the 90s, really establishing ourselves. There were all kinds of new work. We had done master class. We had done something called Bunny Bunny about Gilda Radner.
Right.
Lives of the Saints by David Ives was a brand new play because we had done his play All in the Timing, which was a
Hmm.
collection of crazy one act only he could write. And this was the next iteration of that. We developed a nice relationship with him. But yeah, we were all doing new work and ambitious work. And it was, yeah, Philly had arrived.
And when Masterclass became the huge hit that it was, that must have been
Right.
something. Audra McDonald, you had
Audra
Audra McDonald in
McDonald!
on the ground floor.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
She had only won her, I think, second Tony by then.
Mhm.
It was only her second.
Yeah.
But she was kind of new to us. I
Right.
mean, she wasn't Audra McDonald yet. But yeah, she was astonishing,
Yeah.
really astonishing. But that was an amazing experience, being in rehearsals with those people, watching Zoe Caldwell go to work. I mean, she was kind of a genius. I mean, it was a level of performance I rarely got to be close to than
Right.
anyone gets to be close to. She was just one of the great stage actresses, I think, of her time. She was terrified of being Maria Callas, so she was, a handful. But just watching that thing come together was like, I never went to grad school, but
Yeah.
this is sort of like this was my master class.
Right. And had Bill Irwin started working with you guys by that point as well?
Well, in the aughts, as they say, in
Yeah.
2004, we did a.
Now we're in the 21st century. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get a little dizzy here. And
I know.
for this
I know.
podcast to reach the 21st century, I get a little.
1992, and now we're in 2004.
Yeah.
We did a play about Dalton Trumbo called Trumbo, written by his son, Christopher.
Hmm.
And, we had to have someone great to be Trumbo because he sits at the desk and talks a lot. And so we put it out there in the world. We're going to look for Trumbo. And we found out that Bill Irwin was interested in doing Trumbo.
Who
And
was then mostly known for his clown work. He was a master
exactly.
clown.
But
Right.
here's the thing. I mean, my theory of why Bill did this was I think he was maybe going to get ready to do Edward Albee's Virginia Woolf. Virginia
Right.
Woolf. He was cast
Which
with Kathleen Turner.
yeah, on Broadway. Yeah.
Right. And I think he wanted to practice talking. I think he wanted to like, I want to do a play where this is my guess,
Okay.
where I'm sitting at the table and I don't use my body, but I am talking as Dalton Trumbo. I think as a disciplined artist, I think he wanted to work up that part of his repertoire a little more
Right.
before jumping in. Anyway, we developed a great relationship with Bill that later paid off when we commissioned him to write something new for the new theater, The Happiness.
Yeah, yeah. Well, before we get to that new theater, we've already
Oh,
mentioned that by the early 2000s, I mean, you were clear back in the 80s that Plays and Players was becoming inadequate to your long-term needs, and yet
oh
you
my
were
God.
continuing to produce there. It had its lovely qualities, but it
Yeah,
had its challenges. And you had the example right there with Philadelphia Drama Guild, which suddenly poof went out of existence
right.
and had never had its own space, despite the fact that its leaders had consistently asked its board for for a new home. So we talked to Greg and Mary about that issue. So when did you start thinking about creating this brand new space underneath a parking garage like the Wilma was on the Avenue of the Arts on South Broad Street?
Well, we started looking aggressively. By the year 2000, we had a space committee that we formed, some board members and members of the community, and any bit of real estate that was up for grabs that might have been the right dimensions for us, we looked at. We looked at anything and everything, old restaurants, the old Woolworth parking lot, anything. And then there is the Avenue of the Arts that presents itself. And we have Wilma there.
Mm-hmm.
And, that became the God, maybe we could be on the Avenue of the Arts, but what's left? It
Right.
was all developed. And then we realized we were told that the city wanted to sell the parking lot or whatever it was that they had at Broad and Pine. It went all the way to Lombard. They were about to put that on the market and they were looking for a developer that would actually bring an arts component, residential component, and parking. And, so we just stood up, so to speak, and
Right.
they were saying, we're the arts. We're the arts.
Right.
Anybody doing residential and parking? And so a few developers reached out to us, one of which was Carl Dranoff. And Carl and we clicked, and he had the vision and the ideas and the experience. And we made the deal, and they sold that lot to him. Then the story unfolds.
Right. And suddenly you're working with Kieran Timberlake, was it the architects?
Aaron Timberlake, yeah.
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 And you're consciously recreating a version of the Plays and Players space, but in a new context above a subway tunnel, right? So there's challenges to the spot.
Oh my God. Yeah, we had to do a lot of remediation to not vibrate and hear that subway. So I think we borrowed a technique that the Kimmel Center had done. There's a layer that separates out the wall from subway, an extra layer of baffling that we had to install.
We talked at the beginning about what it was like to have this new space and what it was like to suddenly move from Plays and Players over to the Avenue of the Arts in your own space. This beautiful, for those of our listeners who haven't seen it, it is a proscenium stage, and with a balcony, but it's got these beautiful wavy wood walls. It's
Yeah.
got lovely. It has lovely sight lines and very very intimate. And it works well with both musicals and straight plays.
Right.
It has a rehearsal room. It has dressing rooms where there's no flooding, and
Dry dressing
it
room.
doesn't have office space though. You didn't
No.
make office space for yourself there.
We couldn't fit that into the program. I mean,
Right.
the box office, of course, it has a second stage that has been framed out. That
Right.
I believe the new guys over there, Taby and Tyler, I think they will be opening,
Right.
knock on wood, an actual second stage. I know they've
Yeah.
been working on it.
But what was some of your favorite new productions in that space? We talked about Being Alive, Billy Porter's Sondheim review, but I also remember seeing Adam Gittle's Light in the Piazza there.
Oh God, Joe Colarco directed that. Yes, the Light in the Piazza was one of my favorites. It was just so beautiful. I mean, the
Yeah.
score, Adam Gettle is just the most divine. That's corny, but a really divine composer. His musical world is just it's hard to describe it.
But you also did Bill Irwin's The Happiness Project.
Yes, the happiness lecture
Happiness Lecture, right.
that we developed over like, oh my God, 2 years, at least 2.5 years. And this was while he was on the road with the Edward Albee, with Kathleen doing the
Virginia Woolf, yeah.
Virginia Woolf. When he would have a break, maybe in between cities, he'd come back and we'd find a space to, and cast members or, just actors to work with him. So
Which were all Philly actors who were all very talented Philly people and dancers like
we
Miss.
had such a great cast. We had Jen Childs was
Right.
in it, and Lee Etzold, and I'm not going to be able to remember everybody. Nicole Canuso,
Nicole Canuso, yeah.
Melanie Cotton. Oh, just so many
Yeah.
people.
Aaron Cromie, wasn't he in that
Oh,
too?
Aaron Cromie. I did have a. You want to hold on? I have the pleasure
Sure.
right here.
Oh, yeah, yeah, go.
Oh, here he is. Here's Bill.
Oh, there it is.
Okay. Okay. This
Well,
was
she's
great.
showing me a picture of Bill in a straw boater and baggy pants.
Okay. This cast rocked. And what he did to that space, Bill, I mean, people were like literally climbing up the walls. Okay. We had locally, we had Makoto Hirano, Leanne Etzel, Aaron Cromie, Melanie Cotton, Jennifer Childs, Nicole Canuso. Oh, maybe, Dawn Filato.
Oh, yes, Dawn certainly was. I saw her
Yes,
just the
of
other
course,
day.
I
Yeah,
just realized she understudied a lot of.
sure.
Anyway, it was a big ensemble plus Bill. And it was, he was another person watching him work on this thing for a couple of years and then going into serious rehearsal with the Suzanne Roberts was extraordinary. I mean, again, he's a genius. He just is.
Yeah, well, everyone, I must admit that I missed it because I think I was doing other shows at the time. I was finally in Philly by then, but I missed it because I was doing my own stuff the way it is. But everyone who saw it just told me how extraordinary it was.
Oh, he
But
was.
now you mentioned a name very quickly that I think we passed over because we built this theater called the Suzanne Roberts Theater,
Yeah.
and we should mention who Suzanne Roberts was. And Penny Reed has talked a lot about her in our
Oh,
interview with
sure.
her because she and Penny were good friends.
Right.
But her husband basically gave it. It was a huge gift from him.
Yeah, he was the founder and chairman, president.
Comcast, yeah.
Yeah. Ralph was also on the board of the Philadelphia Company back in the day. He was on
So he's been a long-term supporter of this project right from the beginning.
Bob's board. And I think when Bob left, I think he stayed on a little bit. We had a long history with the Roberts. But yeah, Suzanne, was a great supporter. I mean, she was an actress and she was a great supporter of the arts and adored theater and dance. Yeah, so we were very lucky to get that support. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to get too deep into the 21st century because I start to get nervous. I start to when we get no. I'm just stopping myself. I'm not stopping you because there is a difficult period financially the theater goes through after the 2008 Great Recession, which came just at the wrong moment for PTC. It just made a huge financial commitment to the space.
We had opened the theater the year before. We were in an active capital campaign. We had
And so I want to leave it there because I always worry that this. I don't want this podcast ever to become about journalism. We're going to talk about what was and leave the present for others. But as you stepped down from the senior leadership position in what year? Was 2017, was it?
Oh my God, we are fast forwarding. Okay.
Yeah, we are.
2017. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a long run as a leader. Yeah.
I mean, because before I became the artistic director, there were those 2 years that I was hanging around the company living on unemployment compensation and grants and my own charity. So I was there for, I guess, 37 years.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
It is. Well, so as we leave this interview, I just want you to maybe share with us one glorious moment that you remember in Philly theater. Maybe it wasn't something that you did, or something you were working. The point when it all seemed like it was coming together and exactly the way you wanted it to be. That yes, this is when I started into this world. This is what I was thinking of. This is it. What springs to mind?
I don't. Boy, that's daunting. I don't know. There was a production I was particularly proud of doing because it required a lot of producerly finessing to do it, and I was proud of the way we solved we made this happen, and that was when we did the Scottsboro Boys, the musical.
Yes.
That was a sort of something that I was particularly proud of because the show was astonishing. No, it was fabulous on Broadway, and I went to see it, and I thought,
Right.
this is incredible. And it was getting boycotted for all the wrong reasons.
Right. Because
Because there was some blackface in it, but it was to condemn blackface.
right.
Celebrate it, but and Susan Stroman did the choreography and the direction, and I love her work, and she was great, and it had too short a run, and I know that those producers and John Kander and just felt like
Gone.
bereft. The work was so good, it
Right.
needed a future life. So I went up and talked to the Weislers who produced it on Broadway, and we made a deal. There was an appetite of all the artists to remount this, maybe in other places, and I said, let us do it, we'll help you figure that out, how to do that. They would give us the set, we could make all those economies. We'll do some recasting, we'll have some Philly people.
This is January of 2012. It's going up.
Yes, it was. I guess it was. And Forrest McClendon was one of the duos that worked with.
Right. Forrest McClendon and Rodney Hicks.
Yeah,
Theater.
Rodney Hicks.
Right.
It was extraordinary. I mean,
Yeah.
the work. Susan, we had Stroman down here. We had John Kander with us, and it was this mix of these great people and great Philadelphia people. It was a blend, and that kind of blend of people from all over working together was exactly what I wanted. And the outreach and the conversations that we structured with the help of partners from the Black community, that was also just a golden cord of kind of all of us getting together, framing the questions and having endless conversations with the audience over and over to talk about this, what happened to the Scottsboro Boys, which was an unbelievable tragedy, and also to talk about what happens when white creators create something out of a historical event that belongs to the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
We were very, very concerned and very sensitive about, the width of cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
We tried to really fight against that by being as inclusive as we possibly could be. At that point, I felt that our theater was just firing on all pistons. I thought that everything that we were doing production-wise, marketing-wise, dramaturgically, outreach-wise, came together in service of an extraordinary piece of work. So I thought, yeah, Suzanne Roberts Theater, this,
Right.
we have maximized it, and we're utilizing everything we worked so hard to get. And so that was sort of a golden moment. I mean, there were other amazing things
Sure.
that happened, that, when we worked with Kathleen Turner to do the Molly Ivins piece,
Right.
Red Hot Patriot. I mean, there were so many wonderful things. It was a treasure trove of things. I feel really lucky that there was such abundance and such good work, and that we made it from Plays and Players to this gorgeous theater. And so now to have it continue on, they're still fighting the same fight. How do we stay in this great theater? How do we make it all work? But of course, now we know the existential crisis that this country is.
Yes.
During-
The company lost a big grant from the NEA, right? The money it had already spent was
Yeah.
pulled from it. Yeah.
Right. Appalling, horrifying, and
Right.
something that we have to stop. That's
Yeah.
what I would say.
Right. Well, I have much to say on that myself, but this is as good a moment as any to let's leave with that glow, that beautiful glow of memory of accomplishment and togetherness and art and fulfillment. Sarah Gorancic, thank you so much for being a guest on Adventures in Theater History. You've been and let me just say here at the end, you've been such a good friend to me over the past year or so. I had met you briefly when I worked just quickly as an understudy in Mary Robinson's show of Outside Mullingar.
At Mullingar.
And I approached you to find out because I was writing this chapter about PTC and the Suzanne Roberts, and you were so open and helpful, and you were so precise with suggestions and corrections. And then you wrote a blurb, which is now on the cover of the book, for which I'm eternally grateful. So I just want to thank you as friend of the podcast. You're an FOP.
FOP.
Yes, you are. So we're very pleased to finally have your voice here on the podcast. And thank you for coming along with us.
So much fun. So much
Okay.
fun thinking about all this. And thank you for being a recording angel for all of us.
My thanks again to Sarah Gorancic, and my deepest gratitude again to you, our fabulous listeners and supporters of Philly Theater History. Thank you for coming along with us on our 100th adventure in theater history Philadelphia. Hi, folks. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast episode, you might certainly want to check out the book I wrote. It is also entitled Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia, and is published by Brookline Books, a division of Casemate Group. This book is a feast of short chapters covering every major era and major figure of theater history in the Quaker City, with lots of surprise appearances by many historical figures that you might not expect to find there. Everyone from Oscar Wilde to Muhammad Ali. Order it at your local independent bookstore, and of course it's also available at large brand name bookstore chains and at all major online booksellers. Just search for Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia. Of course, you can also literally check out this book at many local libraries. If it's not in their collection already, ask your local library to obtain a copy, and then you can read it at no charge. Or you can do what I did, buy a copy of the book and donate it to your own favorite local library so you can share the gift of fun and fascinating theater history with others. We love libraries and librarians and all they do to keep things civilized in this crazy world. In fact, on Sunday, June 29th, I will be appearing at the Brookline Books stall at the 2025 American Library Association annual conference and exhibition at the Philadelphia Convention Center. If you're a librarian or a fan of libraries and are coming to the ALA, please be sure to stop by and say hello.